The millionaire returned home furious but broke down after seeing the nanny with his twins. Before we begin this emotional story, I really want to know where you're watching from. Write your city and country here in the comments, because it's always special to discover the different places where people who love stories about love, overcoming struggles, and new beginnings are watching from. And if you enjoy emotional stories that make you laugh, cry, and deeply touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That way, you help the channel grow and you won't miss any of the next intense and passionate stories I prepare for you. Rain covered Seattle that night as if the entire city were sinking into silence. The lights from the buildings reflected on the wet asphalt while Dominic Hartford's black car sped through the streets far above the speed limit. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was suffocating. The businessman kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched and his cold eyes fixed on the road. His phone was still lying on the passenger seat after the call he had received less than 40 minutes earlier. The mansion's housekeeper had nervously informed him that the twins' new nanny had taken the children out without permission. That alone was enough to make him walk out of a multi-million-dollar meeting in the middle of a presentation. Dominic Hartford did not tolerate disobedience. Since his wife's death 3 years earlier, his life had become a rigid system of control. Everything inside that mansion operated on exact schedules. Private security. Drivers. Cameras. Trained employees. No changes happened without his permission. Especially when it involved Asher and Eleanor. The twins were the only part of Amelia that still existed in this world. And that was exactly why Dominic lived terrified of losing them too. The windshield wipers moved quickly while he remembered the housekeeper's voice on the phone. "Mr. Hartford, I thought you needed to know. Miss Evelyn took the children out. They still haven't returned." "Where?" "She didn't say." Dominic ended the call immediately after that. During the entire drive back to the mansion, his mind created dozens of different scenarios. Accidents. Kidnappings. Family exposure. Reporters. People recognizing the millionaire's children on the streets. All because a newly hired nanny decided to ignore his orders. When the mansion gates finally opened, Dominic accelerated without slowing down. The car stopped abruptly in front of the main entrance. He stepped out immediately, without waiting for the driver to open the door. Rain hit his face and soaked part of his dark suit, but he barely noticed. He simply walked inside. The Hartford mansion was enormous, sophisticated, and far too quiet. White marble, expensive chandeliers, and flawless hallways gave the place an appearance of perfection. But ever since Amelia died, that house had lost every sense of human warmth. There were no laughs. No family dinners. No life. There was only silence. Margaret appeared in the hallway the moment she heard the door open. "Mr. Hartford. Where is she?" he asked coldly while loosening his tie. The housekeeper hesitated. "The children are in their room." "And the nanny?" "With them." Dominic took a deep breath, trying to control the growing anger. His gray-blue eyes looked even colder that night. "She took my children out without permission." "I know, sir." "Does she have any idea what kind of risk that represents?" Margaret remained silent. Dominic walked past her without waiting for an answer and started climbing the stairs. His footsteps echoed through the mansion's second floor. As he got closer to the children's hallway, he felt his irritation growing once again. Who did that woman think she was? Evelyn Parker had only been working in that house for 2 months. Dominic practically knew nothing about her besides her flawless resume and outstanding recommendations. Even so, he had never fully trusted her. After his wife's death, he had become suspicious of anyone who got close to his children. Especially someone so young. When he reached the twins' bedroom door, he noticed something strange. Crying. He stopped immediately. The sound was coming from inside. Dominic frowned and slowly approached the slightly open door. The irritation was still there, but something about that crying sounded different. It was not a tantrum. It was not an argument. It was pain. The moment he looked into the room, he felt his entire body freeze. Evelyn was sitting on the floor between the two small beds. She was still wearing the light coat she had probably worn when she took the children out. Her honey blonde hair fell slightly messy over her shoulders while she held the twins tightly against her chest. Asher was crying with his face buried against her. Eleanor held an old photograph tightly in her small trembling hands. Dominic recognized the picture immediately. It was Amelia. For a few seconds, he simply could not breathe. "Mommy promised she would never leave," Eleanor said between painful sobs. The little girl's voice seemed to shatter the entire room. Asher quickly wiped away his tears, trying to look strong, but he failed. "I can't remember her voice anymore," he confessed quietly. At that moment, Dominic felt something crush his chest. Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, clearly emotional. Then she gently held the boy's face. "Yes, you can." Asher shook his head. "Not clearly. She used to sing to us when it rained," Eleanor said while crying even harder. "But I forgot." Dominic remained frozen at the doorway. That scene hit him in a cruel way because he knew exactly what his children were talking about. Amelia used to sing to them on rainy nights. Always the same song. Always smiling. After she died, Dominic never allowed that song to be played in the house again. He never spoke about her again. He never allowed the children to speak about her either. Because it hurt too much. And now he was seeing the result of that right in front of his eyes. Evelyn pulled both children closer and tried to hold back her own tears. "Your mother loved you both very much. Then why did she leave?" Eleanor asked. The question filled the room with silence. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She seemed to search for the right words while gently stroking the little girl's hair. Dominic quickly looked away. His heart pounded in an uncomfortable way. Then he heard something that completely destroyed him. "Daddy never talks about her," Eleanor whispered. Asher spoke right after her, his voice low and sad. "He's never with us either." Dominic felt his stomach sink. No businessman in the world could have prepared him to hear that. He had built an enormous fortune. He was respected, powerful, and admired. Important men waited hours just to have a meeting with him. His name appeared in business magazines and luxurious events. But his own children felt lonely inside his house. And that devastated him. Evelyn realized how much pain the children's words carried. She took a deep breath before answering softly. "Your father loves you both very much. Then why does he seem so far away?" Eleanor asked. Dominic immediately closed his eyes. His throat burned. For the first time since his wife's funeral, he truly felt his eyes filling with tears. He had spent years running from that pain. He buried himself in work. He turned into a cold man because he believed feeling less meant suffering less. But standing at that doorway, he realized something terrible. While trying to escape his own pain, he had emotionally abandoned his children too. Evelyn kept holding the twins close. Sometimes people get lost when they are hurting, she said quietly. But that doesn't mean they stopped loving. Asher slowly lifted his tear-filled eyes. Do you think our dad can still smile? The question hit Dominic brutally. Because he could not remember the last time he had truly smiled at his children. He could not remember the last time he sat on the floor to play with them. He could not remember the last time he hugged those children without being in a hurry to return to work. Silence filled the hallway. And for the first time in many years, Dominic Hartford realized that he was not only losing his own happiness. He was losing his children's childhood right before his eyes. Dominic remained frozen at the bedroom door, unable to move a single muscle. The dark hallway behind him contrasted with the soft lighting inside the children's room, where small yellow lights beside the beds made the space feel warm for the first time in years. Rain continued hitting the mansion's enormous windows, but inside that room everything seemed suspended in time. Evelyn still held the twins on the floor, completely focused on comforting them, unaware that the most feared man in that house was listening to every word. Asher wiped his wet face with the sleeves of his navy blue pajamas, now wrinkled from tears. The boy, usually so quiet and withdrawn, looked emotionally exhausted. His light-colored eyes were red from crying so much. Eleanor still clung tightly to her mother's photograph as if she were afraid of losing it too. Her dark blonde hair was messy over her small shoulders while she trembled softly. Dominic watched his children and felt unbearable pain growing inside his chest. Then Asher said something that made his entire world stop. I didn't want a rich father. The boy's voice came out low, breaking in the middle of his crying. I just wanted a father who would hug me. Dominic completely lost his breath. Those words shattered every wall he had built since Amelia's death. For years, he believed he was protecting his children by providing security, comfort, and stability. He worked even harder after the tragedy. He expanded businesses, multiplied his fortune, bought everything any child could ever want. The twins' bedrooms were larger than entire apartments in Seattle. They had imported toys, new video games, expensive clothes, and the best private tutors. But in that moment he discovered something cruel. His own children would trade all of that for one simple hug. Dominic slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time in many years, he felt ashamed of himself. Eleanor lifted her tear-stained face and asked in a trembling voice, "Do you think one day he'll go back to being the way he was before?" Evelyn gently stroked the little girl's hair. "Your father loves you. But he's always working," Eleanor answered immediately. "Sometimes it feels like he doesn't even want to be here." Dominic closed his eyes for a moment. Every sentence from the children seemed to crush something inside him. Then Eleanor said something even worse. "I'm scared to fall asleep and have Daddy disappear too." The little girl's voice completely broke at the end of the sentence. "The same way Mommy disappeared." Dominic felt his legs weaken. The memory of that night came back like a brutal blow. The phone ringing. The hospital. The rain. The doctor avoiding eye contact before saying Amelia did not survive the accident. After that, everything inside him died too. But while trying to survive his own pain, he never realized his children were living terrified of losing their father as well. Evelyn immediately pulled Eleanor closer. "Look at me," she said softly. "Your father is not going to abandon you." "But he already does," Asher whispered quietly. "Even when he's here." The silence that followed that sentence was devastating. Dominic placed his hand against the wall because for a few seconds he felt his body losing strength. The man who commanded million-dollar meetings without showing emotion could barely breathe now while listening to his own children. Evelyn took a deep breath before speaking again. Her delicate face was emotional too. Her green eyes shimmered with tears while she tried to stay strong for the children. Sometimes adults get so hurt inside that they begin hiding from life without realizing it. Is that what happened to Daddy? Eleanor asked. Evelyn hesitated for a moment. I think he misses your mother very much. Dominic completely lowered his head. No one in that house had spoken about Amelia in years. Her name had practically disappeared from the mansion after the funeral. The photographs were removed from the hallways. Her songs were never played again. Even the perfume she used to wear was hidden because Dominic could not bear to feel anything. He believed erasing everything would make the pain smaller. But now he realized he had only forced his children to suffer alone. Asher looked at Evelyn sadly. When Mommy died, I heard Daddy crying in his room. Dominic froze. But the next day he acted like everything was normal, the boy continued. After that he never cried again. Eleanor held the photograph even tighter against her chest. I miss when he used to smile. Dominic immediately felt his eyes burning. The image of his wife appeared violently in his mind. Amelia running through the house while the twins were still little. Amelia laughing during breakfast. Amelia hugging him from behind while he worked in his office. Amelia telling him he needed to spend less time thinking about money and more time living. He ignored all of it. He thought he had time. Now the woman he loved was dead, and his children saw him as a stranger inside their own home. A tear finally rolled down Dominic's face. The first one in years. Evelyn kept holding the children without realizing he was there. Her voice was calm, comforting, and firm at the same time. Listen to me. Your father may be lost right now, but lost people can still find their way back. Asher slowly raised his eyes. And what if he doesn't want to come back? The question hung in the room. Dominic felt his heart sink in desperation because, for the first time, he realized his own children were already starting to give up on him. Then Eleanor wiped away her tears and asked the question that destroyed the last emotional defenses still left inside him. Do you think Daddy still loves us, or does he only feel sorry for us? Dominic immediately covered his mouth with his hand. That completely broke him. The cold, powerful, untouchable man everyone knew simply disappeared at that doorway. All that remained was an emotionally shattered father, facing the consequences of his own absence. And it was exactly at that moment that Dominic's phone began ringing inside his suit pocket, breaking the silence in the room and finally making Evelyn turn toward the doorway. The sudden sound of the phone made Evelyn immediately look toward the door. The moment she saw Dominic standing there, the color seemed to drain from her face. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The businessman remained frozen in the dark hallway, still holding the phone inside his pocket while trying to hide his tear-filled eyes. Evelyn realized instantly that he had heard everything. Asher and Eleanor also looked toward the door. Silence filled the room. Dominic quickly regained the cold posture he usually wore like armor. He discreetly wiped his face before anyone could notice his tears and stepped into the room with slow movements. It's late, he said in a low, controlled voice. The children need to sleep. Evelyn nodded immediately. Of course. She helped the twins lie down. Eleanor still held her mother's photograph tightly against her chest while Asher stayed unusually quiet, avoiding looking at his father. Dominic felt that distance like a silent stab wound. Before turning off the light, Evelyn gently kissed the children's foreheads. Good night, little ones. Are you leaving? Eleanor asked quickly, frightened. The question made Dominic lift his eyes toward the nanny. Evelyn forced a soft smile. No. I'll be here tomorrow. Only after hearing that did the twins seem calmer. Dominic watched everything in silence. That woman had managed in just a few weeks to do something he had failed to do in years, bring emotional safety back into his children's lives. But his pride would not allow him to accept that easily. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky over Seattle remained gray. The Hartford mansion felt even colder during breakfast. Dominic sat at the head of the enormous dark wooden table wearing an impeccable suit, as if he were about to walk into another important meeting. The newspaper remained open in front of him, but he was not even reading the headlines. His mind was still trapped in the previous night. The twins had gone early to their private lesson in the mansion's winter garden. For the first time in a long while, Dominic realized how uncomfortable the silence inside that house truly was. When Evelyn entered the room, he immediately looked up. She wore simple yet elegant clothes in light tones. Her honey blonde hair was tied in a delicate low bun, with a few soft strands falling beside her face. Despite her calm appearance, Dominic noticed that she was nervous. "Mr. Hartford," she said politely. Dominic slowly closed the newspaper. "Sit down." The cold tone made Evelyn understand that the conversation would not be pleasant. She sat across from him, maintaining perfect posture. For a few seconds, Dominic simply observed the young woman in front of him. There was something about her that deeply unsettled him. Not because of her appearance or her work, but because, for the first time in years, someone had forced him to face truths he had spent a long time trying to avoid. "You took my children out without permission," he finally said. Evelyn took a deep breath before answering. "Yes." "Do you understand how serious that is?" "Yes, I do." Dominic narrowed his eyes. "Then why did you do it?" Evelyn lowered her gaze slightly for a moment before answering honestly. "Because they asked me to." That immediately irritated Dominic. "They are children. They are children who are suffering," she answered calmly. The businessman placed both hands on the table. "You had no right to make that decision on your own." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But they needed to go." Dominic felt his irritation rising again. "Needed to go where exactly?" Evelyn slowly lifted her green eyes toward him. "To their mother's memorial." The room seemed to freeze. Dominic became completely still. Evelyn continued in a low, respectful voice. "Yesterday marked 3 years since her death." The businessman immediately looked away. He did not answer. Because he knew it was true. And he also knew he had forgotten. Not the accident. He would never be able to forget that. But he had forgotten the date to the point of pretending it was just another ordinary day. And his own children had spent that entire day waiting for their father to remember their mother. Evelyn noticed the change in his expression. "Asher asked me if anyone still brought flowers to her," she said softly. Eleanor wanted to talk to her mother for a few minutes. Dominic clenched his jaw tightly. "You should not have taken them there." "Why?" Evelyn asked calmly. "Because it reopens wounds." She held his gaze without arrogance, only honesty. "Their wounds never closed." The answer hit Dominic hard. He immediately stood from the chair and walked toward the enormous dining room window. His hands were tense at his sides. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I understand more than you think." Dominic turned toward her. "You've been in this house for only a few weeks. Long enough to realize those children are afraid to talk about their own mother. The silence became heavy. Dominic felt his breathing quietly falter. Evelyn continued. They did not only need security, Mr. Hartford. Her voice remained firm, but filled with emotion. They needed love. They needed presence. They needed to feel that they could still talk about their mother without hurting their father. Dominic stood motionless. No one had ever dared confront him that way. Employees obeyed him. Businessmen respected him. Everyone carefully watched their words around him after Amelia's death. But Evelyn did not seem intimidated by the money, the mansion, or the Hartford name. She only seemed worried about two hurt children. You think you know how to raise my children? Dominic asked coldly. Evelyn took a deep breath. No. But I do know how to recognize children who are starved for affection. That made Dominic lose part of the emotional control he was still trying to maintain. I gave them everything. Not everything. The answer came immediately. Dominic turned fully toward her. His gray-blue eyes were filled with tension. Evelyn slowly stood up as well. Money does not hug a child in the middle of the night, she said with tearful eyes. Money does not talk to them when they are afraid. Money does not stop a little girl from believing her own father is going to abandon her. Every word seemed to strike directly at Dominic's most painful wounds. He tried to respond, but he could not. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The businessman remained silent for several seconds while Evelyn picked up the empty cup from the table. But before leaving the room, she stopped near the door and said something that sent a chill through Dominic's entire body. Yesterday, at the memorial, Eleanor asked me if her mother would be proud of the family you became after her death. Dominic slowly lifted his eyes. Evelyn held the doorknob before finishing. I didn't know how to answer. Dominic remained standing in the middle of the dining room even after Evelyn left. Her words kept echoing in his mind in a cruel way. I didn't know how to answer. That affected him far more deeply than he wanted to admit. For the first time in many years, he felt like someone had seen beyond the flawless image he built for the world. But along with the guilt, another dangerous feeling was born: suspicion. Downstairs, Margaret discreetly observed everything from the kitchen entrance. The housekeeper had worked for the Hartford family for more than 20 years. She was a white woman with a rigid appearance, gray hair always tied into a perfect bun, and a permanently severe expression. After Amelia's death, she had taken even more control over the mansion, practically managing the entire household routine. To her, Evelyn Parker represented a silent threat. That morning, while organizing the kitchen with the other employees, Margaret commented quietly. I've seen this type of girl before. One of the employees looked up curiously. What do you mean? Margaret slowly dried her hands before answering. Young, beautiful, far too kind to an emotionally destroyed rich man. She let out a small sigh of disapproval. These women know exactly what they're doing. The comment started quietly, but quickly spread throughout the mansion. Drivers whispered in the hallways. Kitchen employees lowered their voices whenever Evelyn walked by. Even some of the security guards started looking at her differently. Evelyn noticed everything. That afternoon, while organizing the twins' school materials in the study room, she felt the strange atmosphere around her. When she entered the kitchen to get hot chocolate for Asher and Eleanor, two employees immediately stopped talking. The uncomfortable silence was enough. She pretended not to notice. May I get some milk? She asked politely. One of the women answered without even looking at her. We ran out of the premium milk for the house. Evelyn nodded silently, but immediately noticed the unopened carton sitting on the counter. That hurt more than it should have. From a very young age, she had learned to recognize judgmental looks. She grew up hearing people associate poverty with hidden intentions. After her mother died, she had to start working early to help raise her younger sister. She spent years entering luxurious homes where employees were treated as invisible. But that mansion was different. Because for the first time, she had started becoming emotionally attached to the children. When she returned to the study room, she found Eleanor drawing while Asher sat near the window watching the light rain fall once again over Seattle. "You took a long time," Eleanor said quietly. Evelyn forced a soft smile. "Sorry, sweetheart." Asher immediately realized something was wrong. What happened? She walked closer and placed the mugs on the table. Nothing. But the children already knew that kind of sad look. Eleanor gently held her hand. "Was it Margaret?" Evelyn looked surprised. "Why would you think that?" The little girl lowered her eyes. "She doesn't like you." Before Evelyn could answer, the study room door opened. Dominic walked in. The entire atmosphere changed immediately. The businessman still carried his flawless cold posture, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, but his eyes looked more tired since their conversation that morning. He quickly looked at the twins and then turned his attention back to Evelyn. "I need to speak with you." The distant tone made Asher discreetly tighten his fingers around his mug. Evelyn nodded and walked out of the room with Dominic. As soon as they reached the hallway, he closed the door behind them. "I heard some comments from the staff." She remained silent. Dominic continued. "I want to make a few rules very clear from now on." Evelyn's expression changed slightly. "What kind of rules?" "You do not take my children out again without permission." "All right." "You do not involve yourself in personal family matters." That hit Evelyn immediately. Dominic noticed. "Even so," he continued. "And I want you to maintain a more professional posture inside this house." The silence between them became heavy. Evelyn took a deep breath before calmly answering. "I have always been professional." Dominic looked away for a moment. Because he knew she was right. But Margaret's comments were beginning to affect him more than he wanted to admit. Part of him was still emotionally vulnerable enough that he could not fully trust someone new being so close to his children. "I'm just trying to avoid problems," he said coldly. For the first time, Evelyn held his gaze without backing away. "Problems or feelings?" Dominic froze. The question irritated him immediately because it struck exactly what he was trying to hide even from himself. "Do not cross boundaries, Miss Parker." His voice came out harsher. Even hurt, Evelyn remained calm. "I never wanted anything from this family except what is best for the children." Dominic did not answer. But his silence was worse than any accusation. At that moment, Evelyn felt her chest tighten. From the way he avoided looking directly at her, she realized the rumors had already planted doubts in his mind. That hurt deeply. Even so, she decided to stay. That night, while helping the twins get ready for bed, she noticed something worrying. Asher was quieter than usual. Eleanor tried to appear strong, but the insecurity in her eyes was obvious. "Are you two okay?" she asked softly. Asher took several seconds before answering. "Are you leaving too?" The question broke her heart. "Why are you asking that?" The boy lowered his eyes. "Because everyone leaves." Eleanor hugged the pillow tightly against her chest. And when Daddy gets angry, people disappear from the house. Evelyn immediately felt tears filling her eyes. At that moment, she realized the twins lived in constant fear of abandonment. Not only because of their mother's death, but because of the emotional coldness created inside that mansion. Then she gently held both of their small hands. "Listen to me," she said softly. "I'm not going to abandon you." Asher finally looked up. "Promise?" Before Evelyn could answer, heavy footsteps echoed through the second-floor hallway. A moment later, Margaret's cold voice came from outside the bedroom door. "Mr. Hartford wants to speak with you immediately." But there was something strange in her tone. Something that sent a chill down Evelyn's spine even before she opened the door. Evelyn slowly opened the door and found Margaret standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. The housekeeper's rigid expression almost seemed satisfied to interrupt that moment between her and the children. "Mr. Hartford is waiting for you in his office," she said coldly. Evelyn nodded silently. Before leaving, she turned back toward the twins. Eleanor was still holding her hand tightly, clearly insecure. "I'll be right back, okay?" The little girl hesitated before finally letting go of her fingers. Dominic was standing in front of the enormous office window when Evelyn entered. The dim lighting made the room feel even colder. The dark wood-paneled walls, sophisticated paintings, and flawless bookshelves gave the place the appearance of absolute power, but emotionally the room felt empty. The businessman remained with his back turned, watching the illuminated city in the distance. "Margaret told me you promised the children you would not leave." Evelyn immediately noticed the disapproving tone. "They were scared." Dominic slowly turned toward her. "You are creating emotional dependence." The sentence hit Evelyn deeply. Children need to feel safe. Children need to learn boundaries. She took a deep breath, trying not to lose her composure. "With all due respect, Mr. Hartford, your children do not need boundaries right now." His gaze hardened. "And what exactly do they need?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment. Part of her knew that conversation could cost her job. "Even so," she answered. "They need someone who makes them feel there is still love inside this house." Silence became heavy again. Dominic looked away first. Because deep down, he knew she was right. After that conversation, the following days became strange inside the mansion. Dominic remained distant, but he started observing Evelyn differently. He noticed small details he had ignored before. The gentle way she brushed Eleanor's hair before lessons. The patience she had while listening to Asher, even when the boy spent long minutes in silence. The way the house seemed less cold whenever she was nearby. But Margaret continued feeding tension. Cruel comments appeared constantly. "She knows exactly how to get close to him." Women like that always appear when a rich man becomes vulnerable. Evelyn heard everything in silence. Because her entire life she had been forced to endure unfair judgment. What nobody inside that mansion knew was that she carried a pain she had never managed to overcome. When she was 16 years old, she lost her younger brother in a car accident during a storm very similar to the one now beginning to fall over Seattle that night. The boy was only 8 years old. Since then, thunder always awakened suffocating memories inside her. The ambulance. The hospital. Her mother crying desperately in the hallway. The emptiness left afterward. Maybe that was why she understood the twins' fear so deeply. Because she also knew what it felt like to lose someone and never feel safe in the world again. That night, the rain started heavily shortly after 10 o'clock. Lightning illuminated the mansion hallways while the wind slammed violently against the enormous windows. Dominic was in his office reviewing documents, trying to distract himself from his own emotional chaos, when he heard hurried footsteps upstairs. Then came a scream. No. It was Eleanor's voice. Dominic immediately stood up from his chair. When he reached the second-floor hallway, he found the children's bedroom door open. Eleanor was having a panic attack on the bed. Her small body shook violently while she cried without being able to breathe properly. Asher stood beside his sister, frightened and not knowing what to do. "She hates storms," the boy said desperately when he saw his father. Dominic quickly approached his daughter. "Eleanor, look at me." But the little girl could barely hear him. "I don't want to be alone, I don't want to." Another thunderclap echoed through the mansion. Eleanor began crying even harder. Dominic felt panic take over him. It had been years since he knew how to emotionally handle his own children. He tried to hug her, but the little girl seemed completely consumed by fear. Then Evelyn rushed into the bedroom. The moment she saw Eleanor, she immediately understood what was happening. She slowly approached. "Hey, sweetheart, look at me." Her calm voice contrasted with the chaos of the storm. Eleanor was crying so hard she could barely breathe. "I'm here," Evelyn said softly while gently holding the little girl's face. "You are not alone." Dominic stood frozen, watching everything. Then Evelyn climbed onto the bed and carefully pulled Eleanor against her chest. She started stroking the girl's hair while closing her eyes for a moment. And then she began to sing. A low, soft, melancholic song. Dominic froze immediately. Because he knew that song. It was the same lullaby Amelia used to sing to the twins during storms. His heart started pounding instantly. Eleanor slowly began calming down in Evelyn's arms while Asher watched silently with tear-filled eyes. The rain continued pouring outside. But inside that room, something felt different. For the first time in years, the Hartford mansion no longer seemed consumed only by pain. Dominic remained standing near the doorway, watching that scene without being able to look away. Evelyn kept singing softly while Eleanor gradually stopped trembling. Then Dominic realized something that deeply shook him. His children felt safe near her. Safe in a way they did not even feel around him. When the song ended, Eleanor slowly opened her eyes, still filled with tears. "How did you know that song?" Evelyn hesitated. For a moment, old pain returned to her face. She gently stroked the little girl's hair before quietly answering. "Because someone used to sing it to me before I lost my brother." The room fell into silence. Dominic felt something tighten violently inside his chest when he realized that woman was hiding pain just as deep as his own. But before he could say anything, Eleanor held Evelyn's hand and asked a question that completely changed Dominic's expression. "Is that why you never give up on us?" Eleanor's question filled the room with silence. Evelyn immediately felt her eyes fill with tears while gently stroking the little girl's hair as she rested in her lap. For a few seconds, she could not answer. The memories of her brother came back too strongly. The smell of the hospital. The rain that night. The emptiness that never completely disappeared. "Maybe," she answered softly, trying to smile. "When you lose someone you understand how painful it is to feel alone." Eleanor hugged her immediately. Dominic watched everything from near the doorway. The soft lighting of the room made Evelyn's face look even more delicate while she held his daughter with almost maternal care. For the first time since Amelia's death, he saw the twins sleep peacefully after a storm. And that deeply affected him. In the following days, something began changing inside the Hartford mansion. Small things. almost imperceptible, but enough to slowly transform the cold atmosphere of that house. Dominic started coming home earlier from work. At first, the employees were surprised. For years, he used to return late at night, often after the children were already asleep. Now he arrived in the late afternoon, still wearing his suit, but trying to take part in the children's routine. The first time he sat at the dinner table with the twins after months of absence, the silence was uncomfortable. Asher almost dropped his glass when he noticed his father sitting there. Eleanor looked at Dominic as if she were afraid he might leave at any moment. Evelyn immediately noticed the tension. She quietly placed the serving dish on the table and tried to ease the atmosphere. Eleanor spent the afternoon drawing. Dominic looked up. She did. The little girl nodded slowly. "Can I see?" The question surprised even him. Eleanor immediately jumped from her small chair and ran to her backpack. She returned holding colorful sheets filled with family drawings. Dominic observed them silently. In almost every drawing there were 4 people holding hands. But in some of them, he appeared far away. Very far away. That tightened his chest. "This one was in the garden," Eleanor explained while pointing at a simple drawing made with colored pencils. Evelyn made hot chocolate. Dominic automatically lifted his eyes toward her. Evelyn immediately looked away, pretending to organize the plates. But he noticed the faint shy smile appearing on her face. That night, for the first time in years, he heard his children laughing during dinner. The sound felt strange inside that mansion. Strange and at the same time necessary. Dominic's change continued happening little by little. Some mornings, he started taking Asher to the garden before his private lessons. He tried talking even though he felt awkward. He asked about books, games, and drawings. At first, the boy answered only with short sentences. But slowly, he began opening up. One afternoon, Evelyn stood on the balcony when she saw Dominic trying to teach Asher how to play basketball on the mansion's small court. The businessman clearly still did not know how to act naturally around his son, but he kept trying anyway. "You're holding it wrong," Asher said, trying to hold back a smile. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "So now you're telling me I'm bad at this?" "Very bad." For the first time, Evelyn saw Dominic truly laugh. It was not a polite smile for meetings or social events. It was a light, spontaneous laugh that had almost been forgotten. Something strange tightened inside her chest when she saw him like that. Because in that moment, she did not see the cold millionaire everyone feared. She only saw a broken man trying to find his way back to his children. And that was dangerous. Very dangerous. Over the following weeks, the looks between Dominic and Evelyn slowly began to change. Small moments started happening without either of them noticing. Quiet conversations in the kitchen while the children slept. Lingering glances during breakfast. Comfortable silences near the fireplace on cold Seattle nights. Dominic started noticing details about her that he had ignored before. The way she tied her hair back when she was focused. The delicate way she laughed at the twins' jokes. The care she took while covering the children during the night when she thought nobody was watching. Evelyn also started seeing things in him she did not want to see. The sadness hidden behind his flawless posture. The silent effort he made to change. The guilty look in his eyes whenever he realized how much of his children's childhood he had already lost. But emotionally, she resisted. Because rich men like Dominic Hartford did not fall in love with women like her. At least that was what her entire life had taught her. One night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Evelyn went to the kitchen to make tea. The mansion was quiet. She wore a light knitted cardigan over simple clothes, while her honey blonde hair fell softly in waves over her shoulders. When she entered the kitchen, she found Dominic standing alone near the counter. Without his tie. With the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up to his forearms. The businessman looked up the moment he saw her. "Sorry," she said immediately. "I thought it was empty." Dominic slowly closed the bottle of water he was holding. "You don't need to apologize for existing in this house." The sentence caught her off guard. The silence between them became strange. Evelyn looked away first. "The twins fell asleep early tonight." Dominic nodded. "Eleanor seems calmer." "Because you started being more present." He remained silent for a few seconds before asking, "Do you really think I can fix all of this?" The question came out low. Almost vulnerable. Evelyn felt something tighten inside her. "Some wounds never disappear completely," she answered honestly. "But people can rebuild themselves." Dominic looked at her differently that night. Without coldness. Without distance. Just looking at her like a man too tired of pretending he was fine. "You changed this house," he suddenly said. Evelyn froze. "It wasn't me." "Yes, it was." His voice came out softer than usual. "Before you arrived it felt like everyone here was only surviving." Her heart started pounding. That was exactly the kind of emotional closeness she had promised herself to avoid. Because wounded men can easily become attached to whoever helps them breathe again. But that does not mean love. Evelyn had seen stories like that end badly before. So she took a deep breath and emotionally stepped back before it was too late. "The twins needed someone," she said, trying to remain calm. Dominic moved a little closer. "And what about me?" She slowly lifted her eyes toward him. The silence between them became far too intense. Then Evelyn answered with something that completely changed Dominic's expression. "You need to learn how to live without turning the person helping you into a way to fill the emptiness you lost." The sentence hit Dominic deeply. Because for the first time, someone saw exactly what he himself was afraid of feeling. But before he could say anything, a noise from upstairs interrupted the moment. A second later, they heard Asher's frightened voice echo through the hallway. "Dad!" Dominic and Evelyn immediately stepped away from each other when they heard the scream from upstairs. The intense atmosphere between them vanished instantly. Dominic rushed up the stairs while Evelyn followed close behind, her heart racing without understanding what had happened. When they reached the bedroom, they found Asher sitting on the bed, breathing quickly and clearly frightened. "What happened?" Dominic asked immediately. The boy tightly held a small tablet in his hands. "I had a nightmare." Evelyn approached first. "That's all, sweetheart." Asher nodded slowly, still shaken. "I dreamed that everyone was leaving." Dominic felt his chest tighten once again. That sentence echoed in his mind for the rest of the night. Over the following days, Dominic's bond with the children continued growing. The businessman started canceling meetings to watch the twins' online school presentations, began eating breakfast with them, and even tried making pancakes one Sunday morning, something that ended in complete disaster and caused genuine laughter from Eleanor. For the first time since Amelia's death, the Hartford mansion felt alive. And that deeply bothered Margaret. The housekeeper watched everything in silence. The way Dominic looked at Evelyn. The way the children had become emotionally attached to her. The growing influence that young woman now had inside the house. To Margaret, all of that was dangerous. One rainy afternoon, While Dominic worked in his office, she entered carrying an old folder in her hands. "Mr. Hartford, I need to show you something." Dominic barely looked up from the documents. "I'm busy." "This involves Evelyn Parker." The businessman slowly lifted his eyes. Margaret walked toward the desk and placed the folder in front of him. Inside were old printed articles from a local Chicago news website, along with documents from an investigation that had been closed years earlier. Dominic began reading silently. Evelyn's name appeared connected to an extremely wealthy family involved in accusations of domestic neglect and child abuse. In one of the articles, there was an accusation suggesting that a former employee had tried to extort money from the family after a scandal involving the couple's son. Evelyn Parker. Dominic immediately felt his stomach tighten. Margaret carefully watched every reaction. "I warned you from the beginning that this woman was not who she seemed." Dominic continued reading. His face turned cold again. Part of him wanted to believe none of it made sense. But another part of him, still traumatized by loss, fear, and his inability to trust, began shutting down once more. "Why didn't this appear in the background check?" he asked coldly. "Powerful families can hide many things." Margaret let out a small sigh. "She's very intelligent, Mr. Hartford." Silence filled the office. Dominic slowly closed the folder. The pain of possible betrayal mixed with something even worse, disappointment. That night, the mansion was prepared for a small charity dinner with several important Hartford company guests. Employees moved around the main hall organizing glasses and decorations while Eleanor and Asher ran through the hallway, looking like normal children for the first time in a long while. Evelyn watched them smiling while helping Eleanor fix her light blue dress. "Do you think Daddy is happy today?" the little girl asked. Evelyn smiled softly. "I think so." But at that exact moment, Dominic entered the room. And something in his expression immediately made her smile disappear. Cold. Distant. Closed off once again. "I need to speak with you," he said emotionlessly. The tone caught the attention of several nearby employees. Evelyn instantly realized something was wrong. She followed Dominic toward the center of the main hall. Massive chandeliers illuminated the sophisticated room while employees continued preparing the dinner around them. Dominic held the folder in his hands. "You want to explain this to me?" Evelyn slightly frowned as she took the documents. The moment she saw the pages, all color vanished from her face. Margaret quietly watched from the background. The silence became heavy. Dominic crossed his arms. So it was true. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes. "You investigated my past. Maybe I should have done that before allowing you to get close to my children." The sentence hit Evelyn like a slap. Several employees slowed their movements to listen more carefully. She noticed the looks. The judgment. The humiliation. Once again. "Dominic," she began softly. "Don't call me that." His voice came out harsh. At that moment, Eleanor appeared in the hallway beside Asher, but Margaret quickly tried to stop the two children from getting closer. Dominic continued. "You worked for a family involved in child abuse." Evelyn tightened her grip on the papers with trembling fingers. "That's not what happened." "Then explain it to me." Her silence lasted several seconds. Painful seconds. Then Evelyn took a deep breath and finally said something that completely changed the atmosphere in the room. "The boy in that house kept showing up injured." Dominic froze. "I saw bruises on his arms. Cuts. Fear." Her voice started breaking. And nobody was doing anything. The employees now watched in absolute silence. So I reported it. Margaret immediately frowned. Evelyn continued with tear-filled eyes. That family had money, influence, and powerful friends. When the investigation started, they needed to destroy my credibility. Dominic felt something sink inside him. The boy's mother said I wanted money. They invented lies. Altered reports. She struggled to hold back her tears. And in the end, they managed to bury everything. Her voice trembled more with every word. But I don't regret it. Because that little boy needed someone to believe him. The silence inside the mansion became suffocating. Dominic looked again at the documents in her hands. For the first time, he started noticing details he had ignored before. Flaws in the investigation. Vague information. The absence of formal accusations. Evelyn discreetly wiped away a tear before continuing. Do you know what the worst part was? Dominic did not answer. She lifted her eyes directly to him. It wasn't the lies. Her voice broke completely. It was realizing nobody wanted to listen to me because it was easier to protect rich people than believe an employee. Dominic felt the weight of guilt hit his chest violently. Because that was exactly what he had just done. He judged Evelyn the same way everyone else had years earlier. In front of everyone. As if she were manipulative and after money. At that moment, Eleanor appeared again in the hallway, but this time she managed to hear Evelyn's last sentence. The little girl looked at her father in shock. You made her cry. Dominic slowly turned toward his children. And in that exact moment, he realized he might have just destroyed the only person who had brought light back into that house. The frightened look in Eleanor's eyes cut through Dominic like a blade. The little girl stood in the hallway gripping the fabric of her own dress tightly while Asher remained beside her completely still. Both children had heard part of the argument. Evelyn realized it immediately. Her face lost even more color. You two should be upstairs, she said softly, trying to hide the pain in her voice. But Eleanor completely ignored her. Her tear-filled green eyes stayed fixed on her father. You made her cry. The silence inside the mansion became unbearable. Dominic tried to answer, but no words came out. Because for the first time, his children were not looking at him with fear or distance, but with disappointment. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to regain emotional control in front of all those eyes. Then she knelt down in front of the twins. Hey, she said gently while holding Eleanor's small hands. Everything's going to be okay. But the little girl immediately started crying. Are you leaving? That question destroyed the last bit of strength Evelyn was trying to hold on to. She quickly looked toward Dominic. The businessman remained standing there in silence, consumed by guilt and emotional confusion. Part of him wanted to stop everything. Another part was still too hurt to know how to completely trust someone again. That silence was enough for Evelyn to understand everything. She forced a small, sad smile for the children. Maybe it's better if I leave for a while. No. Eleanor desperately grabbed her arms. You promised. Asher remained quiet, but his eyes were filled with restrained tears. Evelyn felt her heart break seeing them like that. Sweetheart, she whispered while gently touching the boy's face. But Asher simply lowered his head. The same painful silence he carried months earlier started returning in that moment. Dominic noticed immediately. And it terrified him. That night, Evelyn silently packed her things in the small bedroom where she stayed on the mansion's third floor. Rain had returned over Seattle, and the sound of drops hitting the window made everything even more melancholic. Her hands trembled while she folded simple clothes into the old suitcase she had used long before working there. She tried to stay strong. Tried convincing herself it was for the best. But the truth was that leaving those children hurt too much. A soft knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, she found Eleanor hugging her teddy bear while Asher stood behind her. Both children were still wearing pajamas. "You shouldn't be awake," Evelyn said immediately, emotional. Eleanor walked into the room without answering. Her eyes were swollen from crying so much. "Did Daddy make you leave?" Evelyn hesitated. "Not exactly." "Then stay." The little girl's voice came out broken. Asher finally looked up. "Please." That completely shattered Evelyn inside. She knelt in front of them and pulled both children into a tight embrace. "Listen to me," she said while holding back tears. "None of this is your fault." "Everyone leaves us," Eleanor whispered. That sentence made Evelyn immediately close her eyes. Because she knew that feeling. She knew the emptiness of losing important people far too early. "You do not deserve to feel that way," she whispered emotionally. The next morning, the Hartford mansion looked exactly the way it had before her arrival. Cold. Silent. Empty. Evelyn left shortly after sunrise. There was no proper goodbye because Dominic could not bring himself to come down from the office while she was leaving. He spent nearly an hour standing by the window watching the car disappear through the mansion gates. Without doing anything. The silence left behind afterward was devastating. In the following days, the twins completely changed. Asher almost stopped speaking again. He spent hours sitting by the window staring at the garden without reacting to anything. Not even his favorite toys seemed to interest him anymore. Eleanor started refusing food. On the first day, Dominic believed it was only temporary sadness. By the third day, he found her dinner plate almost untouched. "You need to eat," he said, trying to stay calm. The little girl kept her eyes lowered. "I'm not hungry." "Eleanor." She slowly lifted her tear-filled eyes. "When Mommy died you started disappearing too." Dominic immediately felt his chest tighten. Now Evelyn left too. Her voice broke. "Maybe the problem is us." That completely shattered Dominic inside. He quickly pulled his chair closer and tried to hug his daughter, but Eleanor became stiff in his arms. As if she no longer knew how to trust that anyone would stay. That same night, Dominic entered Asher's bedroom and found a torn drawing in the trash. He slowly picked up the pieces. It was a family drawing. But Evelyn had been ripped out of the page. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, feeling something suffocate inside him. "Did you do this?" Asher nodded without looking at his father. "Why?" The boy tightened his small fingers against the blanket. "Because I don't want to remember someone who left." The sentence hit Dominic brutally. Finally, he began understanding the size of the damage he had caused. He had not only lost a nanny. He had lost the only person who managed to bring life back into that house. The only person who hugged his children when he himself did not know how. The only one brave enough to love those children without expecting anything in return. And now the emptiness had returned. Worse than before. That night, Dominic entered Amelia's old bedroom alone for the first time in years. The room remained almost untouched since her death. Her soft perfume still seemed to linger among the light curtains moving with the rainy wind. He slowly walked toward an old photograph of his wife holding the twins when they were still babies. And then he finally broke down. He sat on the floor holding the photograph against his chest while silent tears fell after years of being suppressed. "I ruined everything," he whispered in a broken voice. But at that moment, someone desperately knocked on the bedroom door. Dominic quickly lifted his head in shock. It was Margaret. And from the panic on her face, something serious had happened to Eleanor. Dominic immediately got up from the floor when he saw Margaret standing at the door of Amelia's old bedroom. For the first time in many years, the housekeeper looked truly frightened. Her rigid face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly. "It's Eleanor," she said, struggling to breathe properly. She fainted. Dominic's world seemed to stop in that instant. Amelia's photograph fell from his hands onto the carpet while he practically ran through the hallway. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. During those few seconds before reaching his daughter's room, every terrible possibility crossed his mind. When he opened the door, he found Eleanor lying on the bed surrounded by soft lights and the sound of rain hitting the mansion windows. The family doctor checked her vitals while a nurse organized equipment nearby. Asher sat silently on the floor beside the bed, hugging his own legs. The scene hit Dominic violently. Eleanor looked far too small in that enormous bed. Far too fragile. "What happened?" he asked, his voice failing. The doctor looked up. "She is physically stable now, but emotionally exhausted. She spent days barely eating." Dominic immediately looked at his unconscious daughter. The little girl's face was pale. The dark circles under her eyes revealed nights spent secretly crying. That destroyed something inside him. "Will she be okay?" he asked quietly. "Not if she continues in this emotional state." The doctor slowly removed his glasses before continuing. "Children do not process abandonment the same way adults do." The word hit Dominic like a punch. Abandonment. He slowly walked to the bed and held his daughter's small hand. Eleanor's hands had always resembled Amelia's. Delicate. Small. Warm. Now they were cold. "She kept asking for Evelyn the entire time," Margaret said quietly behind him. Dominic immediately closed his eyes. Asher finally looked up. His blue eyes were red and empty again. "You promised she wouldn't leave." The sentence came out softly. Without anger. Without shouting. And that made it worse. Dominic felt guilt crush his chest in an almost unbearable way. But he could not finish. Because there was no excuse. Not for the children. Not for himself. That night, after Eleanor stabilized and finally fell asleep, Dominic remained alone in the mansion hallway. Rain still poured heavily outside. The silence of that house had once again become suffocating, exactly like before Evelyn arrived. Maybe even worse. Because now he knew what that house could have been. Filled with life. With laughter. With warmth. And he was the one who destroyed it. Dominic slowly walked into the office and poured himself a glass of whiskey, but stopped before even taking a sip. He looked at his exhausted reflection in the window and barely recognized the man staring back at him. The flawless businessman. The admired millionaire. The powerful man who controlled everything. Everything except his own family. Then something finally broke inside him. For the first time in years, Dominic allowed the memories to return without running from them. Amelia appeared in his mind painfully alive. Her smile. Her voice. The way she laughed loudly during dinners. The mornings when she ran through the kitchen chasing the twins while they were still little as he answered emails without paying attention. The moments when she held his face and said, "You're going to regret missing these moments." Back then, Dominic always answered the same thing. "I'm doing all this for you." But Amelia saw what he could not. Money was never what she wanted most. She wanted presence. Eleanor wanted presence. Asher wanted presence. And Evelyn tried to show him that from the very first day. Dominic slowly sank into the office chair while the memories continued crashing over him like an uncontrollable avalanche. Then the worst memory appeared. The night of the accident. He was in New York attending a billion-dollar meeting with foreign investors. Amelia called him 3 times that night. 3 times. During the first call, she asked when he would return to Seattle. During the second, she wanted him to say goodnight to the twins over video. During the third, Dominic never answered. Because he was too busy discussing contracts. Hours later, he received the call from the hospital. It was raining heavily that night too. Amelia's car lost control on a wet road while she was returning from a charity event. She died alone. And the last thing she heard from him was not "I love you." It was an automatic message saying he would call back later. Dominic immediately covered his face with his hands. The pain from that memory finally exploded without control. "Oh my God," he whispered in a destroyed voice. "Oh my God." The tears came violently this time. Years of buried guilt collapsed all at once. He did not distance himself from his children because he stopped loving them. He distanced himself because he was afraid. Afraid of loving someone that deeply again and losing them too. Afraid of looking at Asher and Eleanor and seeing Amelia inside them. Afraid of creating happy memories only for fate to rip them away again. So he chose emotional distance. He chose work. He chose hiding behind meetings, contracts, and money because it seemed less painful than feeling. But while trying to protect himself from loss, he destroyed his own children in the process. Evelyn tried to warn him. Tried to make him see. And he humiliated her in front of everyone. Dominic abruptly stood from the chair, feeling his chest tighten desperately. He grabbed his car keys without thinking twice. He needed to find her. He needed to fix everything before it was too late. Seattle was still waking up when his car crossed the rain-soaked streets from the night before. Dominic gripped the steering wheel tightly while his heart felt ready to burst out of his chest. He had never been this nervous in his entire life. Because this time he was not chasing business. He was chasing someone who truly mattered. After nearly 40 minutes of driving, he parked in front of a small, simple apartment building in a quiet part of the city. Nothing there resembled the luxury of the Hartford mansion. The building was old, with narrow hallways and dim lighting. Dominic quickly climbed the stairs until he found Evelyn's apartment. For a few seconds, he stood frozen in front of the door without courage to knock. Because for the first time in many years, he did not know how to act without the mask of a powerful man. Then he finally knocked. Several seconds passed before the door opened. Evelyn appeared wearing loose, simple clothes, clearly surprised to see him there. Her honey blonde hair was tied up messily, and her eyes still looked exhausted from crying over the last few days. The moment she saw Dominic, her expression immediately changed. Defensive coldness. Pain. And disappointment. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out low. Dominic took several seconds before answering. Because while looking at that small, simple apartment behind her, he realized another painful truth. Evelyn never wanted money. Never wanted status. Everything she truly did in that mansion was love his children. And he destroyed that. Eleanor fainted, he finally said. The color immediately drained from her face. What? She stopped eating. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears instantly. Asher barely speaks anymore. She covered her mouth with her hand, clearly shaken. Dominic took a deep breath while trying to control his own emotions. I ruined everything. The silence between them became heavy. Then he said something he never imagined admitting out loud to anyone. I blame myself for my wife's death. Evelyn remained frozen. Dominic slowly lowered his eyes. She called me that night. His voice started failing. And I ignored it because I was in a meeting. The tears immediately returned. After that I was never the same again. Evelyn watched a man completely different from the cold millionaire she had met months earlier. For the first time, Dominic Hartford looked like nothing more than a man destroyed by guilt. I pushed my children away because I was afraid of loving someone that deeply again, he confessed. I thought emotional distance would protect me. He lifted his tear-filled eyes toward her. But you were right. His voice came out broken. They needed more than security. Evelyn felt her own eyes filling with tears. Dominic took a step closer. You were treated unfairly in that house. Another step. By me. He took a deep breath before continuing. And by everyone who chose to believe lies because it was easier than seeing who you really are. The silence became intense. Evelyn tried controlling her emotions, but it was impossible not to feel his sincerity this time. Then Dominic said something that made her heart race. You were the only person who truly saved my children. Their eyes remained locked on each other. And for the first time, there were no barriers between them. Only pain. Truth. And something much deeper beginning to grow. But at that exact moment, Evelyn's phone suddenly started ringing desperately on the living room table. She quickly grabbed it. It was Margaret. And from the panic that appeared on Evelyn's face seconds later, Dominic immediately realized that something much worse had happened at the Hartford mansion. All the color drained from Evelyn's face while she held the phone against her ear. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her green eyes widened in panic. Dominic immediately understood something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. What happened? He asked, quickly moving closer. Evelyn slowly lowered the phone, still trying to process what she had just heard. Eleanor disappeared. For a few seconds, Dominic simply stopped breathing. What? Margaret woke up and found her bed empty. The businessman felt all the blood leave his face. His heart started pounding violently inside his chest. She left the mansion alone. Dominic did not wait to hear anything else. He immediately rushed out of Evelyn's apartment while she followed close behind. Minutes later, the two of them were driving through Seattle beneath heavy rain. The gray sky perfectly reflected the emotional chaos consuming Dominic at that moment. During the entire drive, his mind repeated the same desperate question. What if something happened to Eleanor? The fear was so suffocating he could barely think clearly. When they arrived at the Hartford mansion, they found police officers near the gates and employees scattered across the garden. Margaret cried nervously near the main entrance while Asher sat on the mansion steps hugging his knees. The moment he saw Evelyn step out of the car, the boy immediately stood up. She went looking for Mommy, he said with a breaking voice. Dominic felt the ground disappear beneath him. What did you say? Asher quickly wiped his eyes. She said that if she found Mommy, maybe everyone would be happy again. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back her panic. Dominic closed his eyes for a moment. All of this was his fault. Minutes later, while police officers organized search teams nearby, Evelyn quickly walked over to Dominic. "There's one place." He immediately looked at her. "The memorial." Dominic froze. Of course. The memorial where the twins had left flowers for Amelia. Without wasting another second, they rushed back into the car. The rain was falling even harder now. Dominic drove with tense hands gripping the steering wheel while Evelyn remained silent beside him. But after a moment, she gently held his arm. "We're going to find her." Dominic took a deep breath, trying to control his desperation. "I already lost Amelia," he said in a broken voice. "I won't survive losing my daughter too." The honesty in that sentence immediately filled Evelyn's eyes with tears. For the first time, Dominic did not seem like a rich, powerful, untouchable man. He looked like nothing more than a terrified father. When they arrived at the small memorial near the lake where Amelia used to take the children, Dominic practically jumped out of the car running. And then he saw her. Eleanor was sitting on the wet ground in front of the plaque with her mother's name on it. Small. Fragile. Alone beneath the rain. Dominic felt his heart completely shatter. Eleanor. The little girl slowly lifted her face. Her eyes were red from crying so much. "Daddy." Dominic ran toward her and dropped to his knees on the soaked ground without caring that the heavy rain was ruining his expensive suit. Then he hugged her. Tightly. Desperately tightly. As if he were terrified of letting go and losing her again. Eleanor immediately started crying in his arms. "I just wanted our family back." Her voice destroyed the last emotional defenses still left inside Dominic. "You are not going to lose me," he said while holding his daughter's face with trembling hands. "Never again." The tears streamed down uncontrollably now. "I'm sorry." Eleanor hugged him again while Dominic finally allowed all the pain he had buried for years to pour out of him. A few steps away, Evelyn watched the scene emotionally. At that moment, she realized something important. Dominic had truly changed. Not because of her. But because of his children. And that changed everything. That night, after they returned to the mansion, Eleanor finally managed to sleep peacefully again. Asher also seemed less withdrawn after realizing Evelyn was back in the house. But before anything else, Dominic gathered all the employees in the mansion's main hall. The room was silent. Margaret stood motionless near the staircase while Dominic looked at every person gathered there. Then he spoke. Evelyn Parker was treated unfairly inside this house. The silence became even heavier. Dominic continued firmly. "Including by me." Evelyn watched him in surprise. "She protected my children when I failed to do so myself." Margaret slowly lowered her eyes. Then Dominic walked toward Evelyn in front of everyone. "No one in this house will ever disrespect her again." His voice was firm. "Because she is not just an employee." Evelyn's heart immediately started racing. Dominic looked at her for several seconds before finishing. "She is part of this family." Asher smiled for the first time in days. Eleanor started crying emotionally. Even some of the employees were visibly moved. Margaret took a deep breath before finally approaching Evelyn. For the first time in many years, the housekeeper looked ashamed. "I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "And I apologize." Evelyn saw sincerity in those words. So she slowly nodded. Over the following months, the Hartford mansion completely changed. The cold silence slowly disappeared. Dominic truly became part of his children's lives. Some mornings he drove the twins to school himself. He made sure to have dinner with them every night. He learned how to listen, hug, and remain present even during difficult days. Sometimes he still woke up terrified in the middle of the night after nightmares about Amelia. But now he no longer faced the pain alone. Evelyn also allowed herself to feel again. For a long time, she believed she would never be seen as anything beyond an employee. But Dominic proved otherwise through small daily actions. Not with money. Not with luxurious gifts. But with respect, care, presence. On a cold winter night in Seattle, months after everything happened, the four of them sat together near the fireplace in the main living room. Eleanor slept resting against Evelyn's shoulder while Asher tried teaching Dominic how to assemble a complicated game the businessman clearly did not understand. "You're terrible at this," the boy said while trying not to laugh. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I'm starting to think you enjoy humiliating me." Asher finally burst into loud laughter. The sound of that laugh filled the entire mansion with life. Dominic looked at his son silently for a few seconds. Then he realized something that almost made him emotional again. Asher was happy. Truly happy. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes and looked at both of them. "Daddy? HM?" The little girl smiled sleepily. "Now this house feels like a home." The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of the fireplace burning. Dominic slowly lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. She was emotional too. And without needing grand declarations, both of them understood the same thing in that moment. Love had not only saved one family. It had saved four broken people who learned together that money can build enormous mansions, but only truth, forgiveness, and presence can transform a house into a real home. So, what did you think about this story? Which scene touched your heart the most? Do you believe Dominic deserved a second chance after everything that happened? Leave a rating from 0 to 10 for this story in the comments. I would love to read your opinions and talk with you about this emotional ending. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to leave a like, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next emotional stories about love, overcoming struggles, new beginnings, and endings that truly touch the heart. And before you go, I prepared another even more emotional story that will deeply move your feelings. Click on the next video and continue experiencing these emotions here on the channel.